Welcome. You are listening to Cozy English. This channel is designed to help you learn English naturally while you rest. Tonight, we have a collection of everyday stories, simple, warm, and full of real English that people use in daily life. Each story is about ordinary people living ordinary moments. You will hear conversations, descriptions, feelings, and thoughts, all in clear, natural English. If you enjoy this channel, please subscribe. It helps us make more content for you every week. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the English wash over you. You do not need to try too hard. Just listen, just breathe, just rest. Let's begin. Story 1. The Morning Routine. Sarah woke up at 7 in the morning. The alarm on her phone played a soft, gentle sound. Not too loud, not too sudden. She had chosen that alarm carefully. She did not like being startled awake. She preferred to ease into the morning slowly, like sliding into a warm bath. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet. Outside, she could hear birds beginning to sing, and the faint sound of a car passing on the street. The curtains were light blue, and the early morning light filtered through them in pale, soft waves. She stretched her arms above her head and yawned deeply. Then she sat up, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and placed her feet flat on the wooden floor. The floor was cool beneath her feet. "Good morning," she said quietly, to no one in particular. It was a habit she had developed years ago, greeting the morning out loud, even when she was alone. It made her feel more awake. She walked to the bathroom, turned on the tap, and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her hair was a mess, sticking up in several directions. She laughed softly at her reflection. After washing her face, she went to the kitchen. The kitchen was small but cozy. There was a wooden table with 2 chairs, a blue teapot on the counter, and a small window above the sink that looked out into the garden. She filled the kettle with water and switched it on. While she waited for the water to boil, she opened the back door and stepped outside into the garden. The air was fresh and cool. The grass was still wet with dew. She stood there in her pajamas, breathing in the morning air, watching a small bird hop across the garden path. The kettle whistled. She went back inside, made herself a cup of tea, and sat down at the kitchen table. She wrapped both hands around the warm mug and looked out the window. The sky was turning from gray to pale gold. It was going to be a nice day. She had a simple breakfast, toast with butter and a little jam, and ate it slowly. There was no rush this morning. She had given herself extra time. She had learned, over the years, that rushing in the morning made the whole day feel chaotic. A slow, calm morning, she believed, set the tone for everything that followed. After breakfast, she washed her plate and mug, dried them, and put them away. Then she went back to the bedroom to get dressed. She chose a blue sweater, dark jeans, and her comfortable walking shoes. She checked the weather on her phone. Partly cloudy, chance of a light shower in the afternoon. She picked up her small umbrella from the hook by the door and put it in her bag. She paused at the mirror by the front door before leaving. Her hair was tidy now. She looked calm. She looked ready. "Have a good day," she said to her reflection, and smiled. Then she opened the front door and stepped out into the morning. Story 2. The Grocery Store. Tom needed to go to the grocery store. He had been putting it off for 2 days, telling himself he would go tomorrow. But tomorrow had arrived twice already, and now the fridge was nearly empty, and he was out of coffee, which for Tom was a genuine emergency. He made a list on a piece of paper, the old-fashioned way, He liked lists. He liked the physical act of writing something down and the small satisfaction of crossing items off with a pen. His list said, coffee, milk, bread, eggs, cheese, pasta, tomato sauce, apples, orange juice, washing up liquid. He folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He grabbed his reusable shopping bags. He had 4 of them, all crumpled together in a drawer, and headed out. The grocery store was a 10-minute walk from his flat. He liked walking there. It was a nice little journey through the neighborhood, past the old church, down a side street lined with terraced houses, and then out onto the main road where the store sat on the corner. The store was busy for a Wednesday morning. Tom picked up a basket at the entrance and began working his way through the aisles. He always followed a route: fruit and vegetables first, then dairy, then bread, then dry goods, then household items. He found it more efficient than wandering randomly. In the fruit section, he chose a bag of apples, pink ladies, his favorite, and then added a bunch of bananas to the basket, even though they weren't on his list. He liked bananas. They were practical. He always had them. He moved to the dairy section and opened the glass door of the refrigerator. A wave of cold air hit him. He stood there for a moment, looking at the different types of milk: semi-skimmed, whole, skimmed, oat, almond, soy. He always bought semi-skimmed. He picked up a 2-pint bottle, checked the use-by date, and put it in the basket. In the bread aisle, he examined 2 different loaves. One was a plain white sandwich loaf. The other was a seeded wholemeal with sunflower and poppy seeds. He held one in each hand, weighing them. Not literally, just in thought. He put the white loaf back and kept the wholemeal. A small, healthy decision. At the coffee display, he paused. His usual brand was on the second shelf, but it was not on offer this week. Next to it, slightly cheaper, was a different brand he had never tried. He picked it up and read the back. Medium roast, smooth and balanced, notes of caramel and hazelnut. He put his usual brand back and tried the new one. A small adventure. By the time he reached the checkout, his basket was heavy. He had added a few things that were not on the list: a tin of soup, a bar of dark chocolate, a small pot of fresh basil. He noticed this happening every time he shopped. The list was a guide, not a law. The cashier was a young woman with a short ponytail and tired eyes. She scanned his items quickly and efficiently without looking up. When she got to the basil, she paused and smiled. "Fresh basil is the best," she said. "Are you making pasta?" "I was thinking about it," Tom said. "Tomato and basil. Simple. Classic," she said and nodded approvingly. He paid, packed his bags, and said goodbye. Outside, he adjusted the bags in his hands, distributing the weight evenly between them, and began the walk home. The sky had clouded over while he was in the shop. It looked like it might rain. He walked a little faster. When he turned the corner near the old church, a few drops began to fall, light and hesitant at first, then steadier. By the time he reached his front door, he was slightly damp but not soaked. He counted that as a win. Inside, he put the shopping away, made himself a cup of coffee with the new brand, and sat down at the kitchen table. He took a sip. It was good. Smooth, slightly sweet, with a warmth that settled in his chest. He picked up the pen from the table and crossed everything off his list. All done. Story 3. The Neighbor. Elena had lived in the same apartment building for 3 years before she properly met her neighbor. She knew he existed, of course. She heard him sometimes, the sound of music through the wall late at night, usually jazz or classical, played at a respectful volume. She had seen him in the hallway once or twice, a tall man with gray hair and reading glasses that he wore slightly too low on his nose. They had nodded at each other. That was all. His name was David. She learned this from the post. A letter had been put in her mailbox by mistake. It was addressed to David Hartley, Flat 4B, not Elena Russo, Flat 4A. She had knocked on his door to return it. He had answered slowly, as if he had to travel a long way to reach the door. He was wearing a dark green cardigan and holding a book, his finger marking the page he had been reading. "I think this belongs to you," Elena said, holding out the envelope. He looked at it, then at her, and his face rearranged itself into something warm. "How kind," he said. "I was wondering where it had got to. Thank you." He paused. "You're my neighbor, aren't you? From 4A? "Yes," she said. "Elena." "David," he said, and extended his hand. They shook. There was a brief, comfortable silence. Then he said, "I don't suppose you'd like a cup of tea? I've just put the kettle on, and I've made far too many biscuits." Elena had been about to say no. She had things to do, emails to answer, a call to make, but something about the way he said it, quietly and without pressure, made her change her mind. "Why not?" she said. His apartment was a mirror of hers in layout, but entirely different in feeling. Where hers was clean and modern, his was lived in and warm, full of bookshelves, framed maps on the walls, a large armchair by the window, a cat asleep on the sofa, and stacks of paper on every surface. "Sorry about the mess," he said, sweeping some papers off a kitchen chair so she could sit down. "I like it," she said honestly. It felt like a real home. He made tea in a proper teapot, ceramic, covered in small blue flowers, and brought out a plate of biscuits. Shortbread, handmade, dusted with sugar. "You bake these?" she asked. "I do, on Tuesdays," he said. "It's something to do." They sat at his small kitchen table and talked for almost an hour. She learned that he was a retired history teacher, that he had lived in the building for 11 years, that the cat was named Ptolemy, and that he had once had 3 cats but now only Ptolemy remained, that his children lived in different cities, one in Manchester, one in Edinburgh, and that he spoke to them every Sunday by video call. He learned that she was from Florence, Italy, and had come to England for work, that she was a translator, working mostly with Italian and English, sometimes French, that she had been in this country for 5 years and still sometimes dreamed in Italian. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Italy?" She considered this carefully. "I miss the food," she said, "the light, my mother's cooking. But I don't miss it the way I thought I would. I think home becomes wherever you put your things." He nodded slowly. "That's very wise," he said. When she stood up to leave, she realized she had forgotten entirely about her emails and her phone call. She felt, somehow, lighter than when she had arrived. "Thank you for the tea," she said at the door, "and the biscuits." "Thank you for the letter," he said. And then, almost shyly, "We should do this again sometime." "We should," she said, and she meant it. She went back to her own apartment, sat down at her desk, and found she was smiling at nothing in particular. After 3 years of nods in the hallway, she finally had a neighbor. Story 4. The Commute. Marcus took the train to work every morning. It was a 35-minute journey, across the river, through the tunnel, up through the center of the city, and out to the business district where his office stood in a tall glass building near the park. He had done this journey so many times that his body knew it automatically. He didn't have to think about which platform, which door, which seat. He arrived at the station, tapped his travel card, went down the escalator, and was on the platform within 3 minutes, without having made a single conscious decision. On this particular Tuesday, the train was more crowded than usual. A signal failure somewhere on another line had rerouted passengers onto his route. He had to stand in the aisle, one hand gripping the overhead rail, his bag pressed against his side. He did not mind standing. He was good at it. He used the time to listen to a podcast, a history program he enjoyed, about ancient civilizations. Today's episode was about the markets of ancient Rome. He found it oddly soothing, listening to descriptions of commerce and everyday life from 2,000 years ago, while standing in a crowded train in a modern city. A child nearby was holding a red balloon. The child was perhaps 3 years old, sitting on a parent's lap, clutching the balloon string with fierce concentration. Every time the train swayed, the child looked up to check that the balloon was still there, then looked back down, satisfied. Marcus watched this and felt a warmth he couldn't quite name. At the 4th stop, a seat opened up across the aisle. A woman in a yellow coat stood to get off, and Marcus moved over and sat down. He took out his earphones and looked out the window as the train emerged from underground into daylight. The city spread out around them, rooftops and chimneys, church spires, cranes in the distance where new buildings were going up. His phone buzzed. A message from his colleague Amara, running 5 minutes late. "Can you grab me a coffee from the place downstairs? Flat white, please." "You're a star." He smiled and typed back, "On it." He arrived at the office building at 9:20. In the coffee shop on the ground floor, he joined a short queue. The barista, a young man with a beard and a cheerful manner, greeted him by name. "Morning, Marcus. The usual? And a flat white as well, please." "Busy morning?" "Train was packed," Marcus said. "Signal failure on the central line." The barista shook his head sympathetically. The joy of commuting. "Every time," Marcus said. He took the 2 coffees in a cardboard carrier, went up in the lift, and arrived at his desk. Amara walked in 3 minutes later, slightly breathless, unwinding her scarf. "You absolute legend," she said when she saw the flat white on her desk. "You owe me nothing," Marcus said. "It was 40 seconds out of my way." "I owe you at least a biscuit," she said, and dropped into her chair. Marcus turned on his computer, took a sip of his coffee, and opened his emails. The day had begun. Story 5. Cooking dinner. Priya decided to cook a proper dinner on Friday evening. Not just pasta from a jar, or soup from a tin, or toast with whatever was in the fridge. A real meal, made from scratch, with care and attention. She had been inspired by a cooking video she had watched that afternoon, a recipe for chicken curry with coconut milk and fresh herbs. The woman in the video had made it look simple and beautiful, explaining each step in a calm, confident voice, and the finished dish had gleamed golden in the pot. Priya had written down the ingredients and gone to the supermarket after work. She came home with a bag full of fresh things: chicken thighs, coconut milk, tomatoes, garlic, ginger, an onion, fresh coriander, and a small pot of red curry paste. She changed out of her work clothes, put on some music, a playlist she called Cooking Music, full of slow, cheerful songs, and began. First, she prepared the ingredients. She peeled and chopped the onion, which made her eyes water despite her best efforts. She peeled and grated the ginger, which released a clean, sharp smell that filled the kitchen. She crushed 3 cloves of garlic with the flat of her knife, the way the woman in the video had shown. She heated oil in her largest pan and added the onion. It sizzled as it hit the hot oil. She stirred it gently, watching it soften and turn translucent. She added the garlic and ginger and stirred again. The smell was extraordinary, warm and savory and deeply inviting. She added the curry paste and stirred everything together. The paste coated the onions in rich red orange. Then the chicken. She laid the pieces into the pan and heard a satisfying hiss. She turned them after a few minutes so each piece was golden on both sides. She poured in the coconut milk, which swirled into the pan in thick white spirals. Then the chopped tomatoes. She stirred everything together, put the lid on the pan, turned the heat to low, and let it all simmer. While it simmered, she made rice. She measured the rice in a cup, rinsed it under the tap, and covered it with water in a pot. She brought it to a boil, then reduced the heat and put the lid on. In 15 minutes it would be perfect. She washed the chopping board and the knife, tidied the counter, and poured herself a glass of water. The kitchen smelled wonderful, rich and warm and complex. She lifted the lid of the curry pan and looked inside. Everything was bubbling gently, the sauce a deep, dark gold. She tasted it carefully. It needed a little salt. She added it and stirred. She set the table, which she did not always do when eating alone, but tonight she wanted to do it properly. A cloth on the table, a bowl, a fork and spoon, a glass of water, and a small candle. She lit the candle. When the rice was done and the curry had simmered for 30 minutes, she served herself a generous bowl. Rice first, then the curry ladled on top, golden and steaming. She scattered fresh coriander over it from the bunch she had bought, the bright green leaves resting on the rich sauce. She sat down, looked at the bowl in front of her, and felt genuinely pleased. She ate slowly, listening to the music, watching the candle flame. The curry was excellent. The chicken was tender and pulled apart easily. The sauce was creamy and warm with a quiet heat that built gradually. She thought about calling her mother to tell her she had cooked a proper meal. Her mother would be impressed. She reached for her phone, then decided to wait until she had finished eating. Some moments were better lived first and reported afterwards. Story 6. The Park on Sunday. James went to the park every Sunday. It was a habit he had started 3 years ago, after a difficult period in his life, when his doctor had gently suggested that a walk in fresh air each day would do him good. He had begun with 5 minutes, then 10, then longer. Now he rarely missed a Sunday walk in the park, regardless of the weather. Today was mild and gray, the kind of autumn day where the air smells of damp leaves and you don't quite need a coat, but you're glad you brought one. James had brought his, an old wax jacket with deep pockets, and he walked with his hands in those pockets, his breath visible in the cool air. The park was large and well kept. There was a central path that looped all the way around, then smaller paths that branched off through groves of trees, past the lake, and along the edge of a meadow that was left to grow wild each spring. James knew all the paths now. He had named them in his mind: the long way, the lake path, the quiet route through the birch trees. Today he took the quiet route. He liked it best in autumn, when the leaves of the birch trees turned yellow and fell slowly, spiraling down through the still air. Walking through those trees felt like passing through something slightly magical. He passed a man playing fetch with a Labrador. The dog was large and exuberant, barreling after a tennis ball with total, joyful commitment, then trotting back with it in its mouth, head high, enormously proud of itself. James stopped to watch for a moment. The dog caught his eye and seemed briefly uncertain about whether to bring the ball to him instead. The man laughed and called the dog back. Further along, he passed an elderly woman sitting on a bench, feeding the birds. She was tossing pieces of bread onto the path, and a remarkable number of pigeons had gathered around her, along with a few sparrows and a large, confident crow who stood at the edge of the flock like a bouncer. "Good crowd today," James said, gesturing at the birds. The woman looked up and smiled. "The crow always comes now," she said. "I think he tells the others." She threw another piece of bread. The crow snatched it quickly and stepped back. "I think you might be right," James said. He walked on. He reached the lake, which was still and gray and reflected the cloudy sky above. A family of ducks moved across its surface, a mother and 7 or 8 ducklings, now half grown, following in a loose formation. James stood at the edge and watched them. They did not hurry. They moved at their own pace, unhurried, unbothered by the world. He sat on a bench by the lake for a while, not thinking about anything in particular. This was the thing he liked most about the park. It gave his mind permission to go quiet. During the week, his mind was always busy, always moving, always processing. Here, it was allowed to settle. Things drifted through it and drifted away again. After some time, he wasn't sure how long, he stood and walked back through the park, along the main path, past the playground where children were climbing and sliding and calling out to each other with great energy and noise, and out through the iron gates at the main entrance. He walked home, made a cup of tea, sat in his armchair, and read for the rest of the afternoon. It had been a good Sunday. Story 7. The Library. Nina loved the library. The library was an old building, Victorian, with high ceilings and tall windows and the smell of old paper and wood polish that seemed baked into the walls. The shelves went from floor to ceiling in the older sections, and there were rolling ladders on brass rails that you could slide along to reach the highest books. Nina had once spent 20 minutes simply riding one of those ladders back and forth before anyone noticed and gave her a look. She went to the front desk first. The librarian today was a woman named Harriet, 40s, with silver-streaked hair and half-moon glasses and an efficient, warm manner. "Morning," said Harriet. "I've set something aside for you. Hold on." She disappeared behind the desk and returned with a book, a novel, with a plain blue cover. "It came in on Thursday. I thought of you immediately." Nina looked at the cover, read the title. "Oh," she said, "I've been wanting this. How did you know?" "You mentioned it in September," Harriet said. "I wrote it down." Nina checked the book out and went to find a seat. She chose her usual spot, an armchair by the window in the back corner of the fiction section, where the light was good and no one could see you unless they came all the way around the shelf. It was a private little pocket of the building, and she thought of it, possessively, as hers. She settled into the chair, tucked her bag under the seat, and opened the book. For the next 2 hours, she read without stopping. The world of the library fell away. The occasional soft footstep, the rustling of pages somewhere across the room, the distant sound of children from the younger section, it all became a kind of white noise, a surrounding hush that held her in place. She only looked up when a small boy appeared around the corner of the shelf. He was perhaps 7, with a serious face and a large picture book tucked under his arm. "Excuse me," he said very formally. "Is this where the adventure books are?" Nina lowered her own book. "Not quite," she said. "Adventure books for your age are probably in the other section, near the stairs. The green shelves." He considered this. Do you know if they have books about pirates?" "I'm almost certain they do," Nina said. "Ask the lady at the front desk. She knows where everything is." He nodded gravely, as if she had given him important intelligence, and walked away with purpose. Nina smiled and went back to her book. At noon, she returned the armchair to its original position, tucked her bag over her shoulder, and went to the front desk to thank Harriet for holding the book. "Good?" Harriet asked. "Very good," Nina said. She walked home through the Saturday streets, the novel in her bag, already looking forward to the afternoon and the evening, and wherever the story would take her next. Story 8, An Evening In. On Thursday evening, Beth had no plans. This was rare enough that it felt, at first, like something she had forgotten to do. She checked her calendar twice to be sure. Nothing. The evening was empty and entirely her own. She changed into comfortable clothes as soon as she came home from work. Soft trousers, a loose jumper, thick socks. She put her work phone on the counter and turned it face down. She was not going to look at it until morning. She made dinner without much ceremony, beans on toast, which she told herself was practical and not lazy, though she knew it was a little of both. She added some cheese melted on top and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the street below where the last of the evening light was fading over the rooftops. After dinner, she ran a bath. This was a luxury she had long promised herself more often and rarely delivered on. She ran it very warm, with a large splash of a bath oil she had been given as a present months ago and had saved, as if for a special occasion. Tonight was the occasion. She lay in the bath for half an hour, completely still. She thought about nothing specific, just impressions, fragments. A conversation she had had that week that she was still turning over, a place she wanted to go someday, a memory of a beach she had visited years ago, the specific quality of the light on the water that afternoon. She got out, dried off, and wrapped herself in the large towel that she kept on the heated rail specifically for cold evenings. In the living room, she lit a lamp, just the small one in the corner, which made the room feel smaller and warmer and quieter. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea, got her book from the coffee table, and settled on the sofa under a blanket. She read for 2 hours. The only sounds were the quiet tick of the clock on the shelf and the occasional car outside. When she put the book down, the clock said 9:10. She felt, in the best possible way, as if no time had passed at all. She turned off the lamp and went to bed earlier than usual. She lay in the dark with her eyes open for a little while, listening to the quietness of the house. The street outside was still. The building around her was still. She was asleep by 9:30. In the morning, she would wake up rested in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. Story 9. The Coffee Shop. The coffee shop on Mercer Street was small, with 5 tables and a counter you could sit at, and it smelled so deeply of roasted coffee that you felt more alert the moment you walked through the door. This was where Luke came to work on his writing. He could not write at home. At home there were too many other things. The dishes that needed washing, the books on the shelf that caught his eye, the bed that offered itself in the afternoon with a persuasiveness that was hard to resist. He needed to be somewhere with a mild buzz of background noise and no personal responsibilities. The coffee shop was perfect. He knew the 2 women who ran it, sisters named Jo and Clara, and they knew his order without him having to say it. He arrived at 9, nodded at whichever sister was behind the counter, and a large oat flat white appeared within a few minutes. He set up his laptop, opened the document he was working on, and read back over what he had written last time. Then he stared at the screen for a while. Writing, Luke had come to understand, was mostly not writing. It was thinking, and waiting, and staring, and starting sentences in your head, and abandoning them before they reached the page. The actual typing was the small iceberg tip of a much larger, slower process that went on underneath. He wrote 2 sentences. He deleted one. He wrote it again differently. He drank some coffee. At the table next to him, 2 women were having a conversation in low voices about something that had happened at a party the previous weekend. He tried not to listen, but he couldn't help it. Fragments drifted over to him. He was a writer. He listened to people. It was an occupational hazard and a genuine pleasure. By 11 o'clock, he had written a page and a half, which was, for him, a solid morning. He closed the laptop and ordered another coffee. Clara brought it over and asked how the writing was going. "Today was good," he said. "I wrote a page and a half." "Is that good or bad?" she asked, wiping down the neighboring table. "Good," he said. "Some days I write half a sentence and erase it." She raised an eyebrow. "And you call yourself a writer?" "That's exactly what I call myself," he said, smiling. He sat there a little longer, just existing in the warm, coffee-smelling room, watching people come and go through the door. A man in a delivery uniform who ordered an espresso and drank it standing at the counter. A teenage girl who spent 20 minutes trying to decide what to order. An older couple who shared a slice of cake and a pot of tea without saying much, but in a way that felt completely comfortable. Luke watched them all with the mild, contented attention of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, and found the world, in its small everyday forms, genuinely interesting. At noon, he packed up his bag, put on his jacket, and said goodbye to Joe, who had come in to take over the afternoon shift. "Same time Thursday?" she said. "Same time Thursday," he confirmed. He walked out into the midday street, blinking in the brightness, already thinking about what would happen next in his story. Story 10. Learning something new. On a Saturday in October, Celine signed up for a pottery class. She had never made pottery before. She had never been particularly drawn to it, but a friend had mentioned it casually. "I do pottery on Saturday mornings, you should come." And Celine, who had been meaning for months to try something new, said yes before she could think of a reason not to. The class was in a studio in the basement of an art center, reached by a steep flight of stairs. When she arrived, there were 6 other students, ranging in age from perhaps 20 to perhaps 70, and a teacher named Owen who had clay on his hands and arms and, somehow, a small streak of it across his cheek. Owen welcomed everyone and explained that they would start with hand building, making shapes without a wheel, using only their hands and simple tools. This was, he said, the best way to begin. It gave you a feel for the clay before you had to worry about technique. He placed a ball of clay in front of each student and invited them to simply touch it first. Celine pressed her fingers into the clay. It was cool and soft and dense. It gave way under pressure and held the shape her fingers left in it. She pressed both palms flat against it and felt it spread slightly. She found this surprisingly satisfying. Owen moved around the room, chatting quietly with each student. When he reached Celine, she was attempting to form her clay into a small bowl by pressing her thumbs into the center. "That's good," he said. "Keep rotating it in your hands, like this." He demonstrated, a slow, circular motion, pressing evenly as the clay turned. "The key is patience. Clay doesn't like to be rushed." "That's going to be a problem," Celine said. "I like to rush things." Owen smiled. "Then this will be good practice," he said. She worked for 2 hours. The bowl she made was uneven and slightly lopsided and had a fingerprint in the side that she had been unable to smooth out. Owen told her it was excellent for a first attempt, and that lopsided bowls held water just as well as symmetrical ones. "Maybe better," said the woman to her left, the older one, perhaps 70, with white hair and very capable-looking hands. "I've been doing this for 15 years. My bowls are still a little lopsided." "Does that bother you?" Celine asked. "Not even a little bit," the woman said and smiled. After class, they put their pieces on a shelf to dry before firing. Celine looked at her small, imperfect bowl. She felt an unexpected affection for it. This modest object she had made with her own hands out of nothing but clay and patience. She was already thinking about next Saturday. Story 11. The Phone Call. Every Sunday evening, Maya called her grandmother. Her grandmother was 81, lived alone in the house where she had lived for 50 years, and had a telephone, not a smartphone, just a telephone, white, with large buttons, that sat on a side table in the living room. Maya's grandmother always answered on the third ring. Not the first, not the second, the third. Maya had noticed this over years of calling and had once asked about it. "The first ring," her grandmother had said, "is to let the telephone know I heard it. The second ring is for me to put down whatever I'm doing. The third ring is when I'm ready to talk properly." Maya had thought about this for a long time afterwards. Tonight she called at 7, as usual. 3 rings, then the click of the receiver being picked up. "Hello, darling," her grandmother said. "Hi, Gran, how are you?" "Very well. I made a pie today." "What kind?" "Apple and blackberry. The blackberries are from the garden. I picked them on Friday before the rain came. I was covered in thorns, but it was worth it." "I bet it was." They talked for nearly an hour, in the unhurried way that they had developed over years. Maya's grandmother did not rush. She considered what she said before she said it, and she expected the same in return. Conversation, for her, was not a transaction. It was a form of company. She asked about Maya's week. Maya told her about a project at work that had been frustrating but was finally going well. Her grandmother listened without interruption and said, "At the end, so it sorted itself out in the end. They usually do." Maya told her about a film she had seen. Her grandmother had not heard of it but asked several thoughtful questions about the plot. She mentioned that the garden was finished for the year now. Everything cut back, the beds mulched, the tools cleaned and put away. "There's something satisfying about putting a garden to bed for winter," she said. "You know it's resting, and you know it will come back." "Like you?" Maya said. There was a pause, and then her grandmother laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "Exactly like me," she said. When they said goodbye, Maya sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. She felt, as she always did after these calls, both a little sad and deeply glad. The sadness was the distance, the gladness was everything else. She put the phone down, got up, and went to make herself a cup of tea. Story 12. The First Day. It was Daniel's first day at his new job. He had been awake since 5:30, even though he didn't need to leave until 8. He had tried to go back to sleep and failed, lying in the dark listening to his own thoughts, which were not particularly helpful. He got up at 6, showered, and stood in front of his wardrobe for too long. He wanted to look professional but not overdressed. Smart casual, the email from HR had said. He was not entirely sure what smart casual meant. He chose dark trousers, a blue shirt, and a navy blazer, then looked at himself in the mirror and decided this was fine. He ate a bowl of cereal standing at the counter, too alert to sit down. He drank a cup of coffee. He looked at his phone, then put it back down. The walk to the office took 20 minutes. He arrived 10 minutes early, which he had planned for, early enough to not be rushed, not so early as to seem anxious. He found this particular calibration of time difficult to explain to people who didn't also think about it. A woman at the front desk looked up. "Are you Daniel?" she asked. "Yes," he said, and felt relieved at being recognized. "Welcome, I'm Fiona." She smiled warmly. "Bit nerve-wracking, first days?" "A bit," he admitted. "It always is. But everyone here is very nice, I promise. Come on, I'll take you up." She showed him to his desk, introduced him to the team in a fluid, practiced way. He shook 6 hands and immediately forgot 4 names, which he would spend the next hour quietly trying to recover. She explained where things were: the kitchen, the printer, the small meeting rooms, the good coffee machine on the 3rd floor. By 10 o'clock, he had been given a login, shown around twice, attended a short welcome meeting where everyone said hello, and been invited to join 3 different people for lunch. By noon, he had chosen which lunch invitation to accept: a small group who went to a nearby sandwich shop and spent 45 minutes in their company discovering, with some relief, that they were funny and kind and not frightening at all. By the end of the day, he was tired in a way that came from attention and newness rather than effort. His brain was full. His shoulders, he realized, had been slightly tense all day, and now he consciously released them. He walked home in the early evening, the streets busy with other people leaving work. He thought about the day. It had been fine, more than fine. It had been, quietly, good. He texted his mother, "First day done. It went well." And then, because he knew she would ask, "Yes, they were nice. Yes, I ate lunch. Yes, I'm fine." She replied within seconds with 3 heart emojis. He smiled, put his phone in his pocket, and walked the rest of the way home. Story 13. The Commute. He had been commuting for 16 years and had, in that time, developed a relationship with the commute that he could only describe as acceptance. This was not resignation. Resignation implied that something better was possible and had been refused. Acceptance was cleaner than that. The commute was what it was part of the day, and fighting it used up energy he would rather use on other things. His commute was 40 minutes each way, by train, and he had in 16 years read a considerable number of books, listened to a considerable number of podcasts, and done a quantity of thinking that he suspected would not have happened otherwise. The commute was not dead time. It was enforced time, time that could not be given to anything requiring a desk or a screen, time that was necessarily interior. He had gone through phases. The reading phase, which had been the most productive. A podcast phase, which he had enjoyed for a year and then found exhausting. A phase of doing nothing at all, which had lasted 3 months and which he had initially found uncomfortable and then found, gradually, genuinely restorative. 40 minutes twice a day of simply being in motion, looking out of the window, thinking or not thinking. The train was usually crowded. He did not always get a seat. He had long since stopped minding about the seat. 16 years of commuting had worn away the irritations into something smoother and less sharp. The delayed trains still registered as inconvenient. The crowding on Monday mornings still registered as unpleasant, but neither ruined the day, and neither had for many years. He got on the train. He went where the train was going. It was, in the end, just 40 minutes. Story 14. The Morning Routine. She did not think of it as a routine. She thought of it as the morning. Other people had routines, which implied systems and intention and the productive management of limited time. She had the morning, which was what she did when she woke up, in the order she did it, for reasons that were partly habit and partly preference and partly the accumulated result of many mornings in which she had tried things until she arrived at what worked. She woke at 6:15 without an alarm, which she had been able to do reliably for 20 years, ever since her daughter had been born, and had trained her body to an early schedule that had persisted after the daughter was grown. She lay for 5 minutes. She got up. Tea first. She made tea before doing anything else, and drank it standing in the kitchen while the light came up, which was different every morning depending on the weather and the season, and was the first thing she paid attention to. She was not someone who took pictures of the morning sky, but she looked at it every day. Then she read, for 30 minutes, not the news, a book. She had been told, many times, in various versions, that reading in the morning was a luxury she was lucky to have, and she agreed, and continued to have it. The 30 minutes of reading before the day properly began had the effect of grounding her in something that was not the immediate demands of the day, which meant the day's demands arrived to meet a person who was slightly more herself, having spent 30 minutes with someone else's sentences. Then the rest. Shower, dressing, the checking of what needed checking, the beginning of the working hours. The morning gave way to the day. She was ready for the day. The morning had prepared her, as it always did. Story 15. The Supermarket. She had been doing the weekly shop every Saturday morning for so long that the supermarket had become a kind of neighborhood in itself. A place with its own geography and population, its own recurring characters and seasonal changes. She did not particularly enjoy supermarkets. She thought most people did not particularly enjoy supermarkets, but continued to go to them weekly because the alternative, which was not eating, was worse. What she had done instead of enjoying the supermarket was learn to be efficient in it. And efficiency in something you must do but do not enjoy was, she had found, the next best thing to enjoyment. She knew where everything was. She knew which checkout queues moved faster, which was the one staffed by the woman who had worked there for 12 years and who was faster with the scanner than anyone else there, and who greeted her regulars with the brisk warmth of someone who had 12 years of Saturday morning greetings to draw on. She knew the delivery times for fresh produce and shopped accordingly. She knew that the bread from the in-store bakery was best warm, between 9 and 10, and timed her arrival for this. She knew that Saturdays before 10 were quieter than Saturdays after 10, and adjusted accordingly. These things were small. She was aware that the sum of them was not a rich life, but simply an organized one. But there was something in the organization that she found satisfying. The knowledge of a place, the small efficiencies, the fact that this necessary and undramatic thing was done well. She went home with what she needed and put it away, and the week began with its supplies in place. Story 16. The cup of tea. She made tea a particular way, which was the only correct way, and she had made it this way for 40 years. The kettle must actually boil. Not merely approach boiling, but actually boil. The full rolling boil that meant the water was hot enough. She had a temperature-controlled kettle now, which she had been given as a gift and which she used for other things, but for tea, she used the old kettle, the ordinary one, because ordinary kettles boiled properly, and temperature-controlled ones tended to be conservative. The pot was warmed first. This had been her mother's practice and her grandmother's before that, and she had inherited it without questioning it, and later looked into it and found it was correct. A cold pot dropped the temperature of the water. The warming took 1 minute and was not negotiable. 1 teaspoon per person and 1 for the pot, which made 2 for herself, alone. Steeped for 3.5 minutes, which she did not time but which she had been doing for long enough that the timing was in her body. Milk in the cup, not the pot. She did not have strong feelings about the milk first or after debate, except that she had always done it this way. The result was a cup of tea that was exactly right, which she drank at the kitchen table with whatever she was reading, in the morning or the afternoon or whenever the day called for it. People sometimes said to her, "It's a lot of effort for a cup of tea." She said, "It is the correct amount of effort for the correct cup of tea." This distinction seemed obvious to her, and not everyone shared her view, which she accepted as one of the things about people. Story 17. The Walk. She walked every day, which had been true for 30 years, which meant she had walked a great many days. The walks were not always the same. She had a selection of routes, varying in length and direction, and she chose between them based on how much time she had and what kind of walking she needed. The short route, 20 minutes around the block and along the canal, was for days when walking was a necessity and not a luxury, when she needed movement but had no time for it. The long route, 90 minutes, up to the heath and back, was for days when she needed to be outside for long enough to reset something. Most days were the medium route, 40 minutes, which took in the park and the market street and a section of the river path. She had walked this route so many times that she no longer needed to think about it, which meant she could use the 40 minutes for thinking about something else. This was the main function of the walk, she had come to understand. Not exercise, though it was exercise, and not fresh air, though it was that too, but the creation of a moving frame within which thinking happened differently than it happened at a desk. Problems that resisted her at her desk often resolved themselves on the medium route. She did not know the mechanism. She had stopped trying to understand it and simply used it. She had walked on every kind of day, in the rain, which she minded less than people expected, in snow, which she loved, on mornings when she did not feel like it and found, once she was out, that she felt like it after all. 30 years of days. She intended to walk every day for 30 more, which would require things going reasonably well, which she chose to assume they would. Story 18. The Dinner Party. She had been cooking for large groups since her 20s, and had learned, over the years, the difference between cooking that was about the food and cooking that was about the people. Both mattered, but they were not the same thing, and conflating them was the source of much dinner party anxiety, which she had worked through in her 30s and mostly left behind. The anxiety had been about the food. Would it be good enough? Would it be impressive enough? Would people leave having thought well of the meal? This was the wrong question, she had eventually understood. The right question was, would people leave having had a good evening? The food served the evening, not the other way around. Good food that required her to spend the whole evening in the kitchen was worse than simpler food that left her at the table. She had designed her dinner party cooking accordingly. Dishes that were almost entirely prepared in advance, that required minimal intervention during the meal itself, that were generous and flavorful and honest without demanding to be admired. She had a repertoire. People who came repeatedly knew the repertoire. This did not bother her. A reliable thing, made well and with care, was better than a different impressive thing every time, and the people she cooked for had learned this, or she had selected them because they already knew it, which amounted to the same thing. The best evenings were the ones where the food was good and not remarked on, because the conversation had taken over. The food had done its job, everything else was happening. Story 19. The Afternoon. She had one free afternoon a week, and she protected it with the care of someone who understood that unstructured time, if not actively defended, would be colonized. Wednesday afternoons. She had managed this for 3 years, partly by having the kind of work that allowed for a specific carved-out time, and partly by treating that time, in all communications, as already committed. She did not say, "I have a free afternoon." She said, "I am not available on Wednesday afternoons." This was technically untrue and practically necessary. What she did with Wednesday afternoons varied. Sometimes she read, sometimes she walked, sometimes she went to the gallery or to a film, or sat in a particular cafe with a notebook. Sometimes she did nothing that could be described as an activity. She sat in the flat, in the afternoon light, with nothing in particular on. The nothing in particular on afternoons had taken the longest to learn. She had been, for most of her adult life, someone who did things with her time, who structured and used and optimized. The nothing afternoon had initially felt like waste. She had gradually come to understand it as the opposite. It was the time in which her mind did what it needed to do when not being directed. Things sorted themselves. Ideas arrived that would not have arrived in a directed hour. She got up from the nothing afternoon often feeling clearer than she had when she sat down. This was productivity by another name, though she preferred not to call it that, because calling it that missed the point. Wednesday afternoons. She guarded them. She was glad of them. They were, in the week's economy, the thing that made everything else work. Story 20. The Bicycle to Work. He had started cycling to work 2 years ago for financial reasons, and had continued for reasons he had not expected. The financial reasons remained. The cycling cost almost nothing, and the alternative, which was a combination of bus and metro, cost considerably more. He had done the calculation on a Tuesday in spring when the fares had gone up again, and had gone home and found his old bicycle in the shed, and oiled the chain and pumped the tires and ridden it to work the following morning with the slightly tentative feeling of someone who had not ridden regularly in 5 years. The route was 40 minutes, which was longer than the bus and metro, and he had expected to resent this. He did not resent it. He had instead found that the 40 minutes on the bicycle were qualitatively different from the 30 minutes on public transport. He arrived at work having been outside, having moved his body, having seen the city at street level from the seat of a bicycle, which was a different angle from the pavement and a different angle from a bus window. He was more awake when he arrived. He was more awake when he got home. The cycling seemed to do something to his metabolism of the day, to change the quality of his energy. He had learned the route well enough to know its variable moods. The stretch along the river, which was reliably good. The hill at the far end of the park, which he had been unable to ride up for the first 3 weeks, and could now ride up in a moderate gear without stopping. The junction that was always complicated and required sustained attention, which he gave it. 2 years of riding the same route. He knew it. It knew him, in the way that regular paths come to feel inhabited by the people who walk or ride them. Story 21. The Rain. She liked the rain. This was a preference she had disclosed to exactly 3 people, each of whom had responded with some version of the same expression, a combination of mild surprise and mild suspicion, as if she might be performing an unusual opinion. She was not performing. She genuinely liked the rain. She liked the sound of it on windows, on leaves, on the different surfaces of a city, the particular hollow sound on the metal roof of the bus shelter, the softer sound on grass. She liked the smell that came just before it, the change in the air pressure that her body registered as something is about to happen. She liked being inside while it rained. She did not like being caught in it without a coat, which was a different relationship with rain. She was not indiscriminate about it. On rainy evenings, she sometimes sat at the window with a cup of tea and watched the rain happen to the street. The street lamps made the wet pavement reflective. People moved differently in rain, more quickly, with more purpose, holding their coats closed or their umbrellas tilted against the direction of the wind. She found it absorbing in a low-key way, a piece of weather changing how people moved through a space they used every day. She had a good umbrella, which she had bought second-hand, and which was large enough to be useful and well made enough to have lasted 7 years. She was attached to the umbrella in the specific way of an attachment to a practical object that works, the affection of use, of reliability, of a tool that does what it is supposed to do without asking anything of you in return. The rain continued. She drank her tea. The street was shining. Story 22. The Letter. She had a friend who still wrote letters, actual letters, by hand, on paper, in envelopes with stamps. This was not an affectation, or not only an affectation. Helena had grown up writing letters. Her family had been scattered across several countries, and the phone had been expensive, and email had arrived when she was already in her 30s, and she had never quite made the shift. She wrote letters because they were what she knew, and because she thought the experience of them was different from the experience of an email, and she had not been wrong. She had been receiving letters from Helena for 12 years. They came at irregular intervals, sometimes a month apart, sometimes 3 months, in blue envelopes with Helena's distinctive handwriting on the front. She always recognized them in the post, and always felt a specific small pleasure at the sight of them that email had never produced. The letters were long, usually, 2 or 3 sides in Helena's handwriting, which was dense and slightly illegible, but which she had learned to read. They contained the things that email contained: news, observations, thoughts, questions, and also something that email did not contain, which was the evidence of physical time spent on the communication, the pen on the paper, the thought required for each sentence to be right before you moved on. She had tried, twice, to write back by letter. Both times she had found herself composing the letter for several days and sending an email instead, which she knew was not the same, and which Helena received without complaint. She kept the letters. They were in a box in the spare room. She did not know what to do with them ultimately, but she was not ready to not have them. Story 23. The List. He made lists. This was not a productivity strategy or a system. It was, as far as he could tell, the way his mind worked when asked to organize itself, which was by writing things down. He had lists for the shopping, and lists for the week, and lists for the projects he was working on, and lists for the things he had been meaning to do for several months and had not yet done, which were a specific category that required their own list. He wrote them by hand, in notebooks, because the physical act of writing was different from typing, and because his handwriting was small enough to fit a lot onto a page. The satisfaction of crossing things off was something he had felt for as long as he could remember. Not because completion was all that mattered. Some things on the list stayed there for good reasons, and the not crossing off was also fine. But because the crossed off thing was evidence of something done, and evidence was grounding, in the way that looking at a thing you have made is grounding. He had notebooks full of crossed-off lists going back many years. He did not keep them for sentimental reasons. He kept them because throwing away a full notebook seemed wrong, in a way he couldn't articulate, and because they were small and did not take up much space. Someone had once told him that the list was evidence of anxiety. He had thought about this and concluded it was not anxiety, but its opposite. The list was what allowed him to not hold things in his head, to put them on paper and therefore stop worrying about remembering them. The list was the anxiety management, not the anxiety itself. He wrote today's list. He crossed off 2 things before the morning was over. This was a reasonable start. Story 24. The Neighbor's Radio. Every morning at 7, the neighbor's radio came on. She knew this because the walls between the houses were thin, and she was always awake before 7, and in the early morning quiet she heard, faintly but clearly, the sound of a radio, the morning news usually, followed by what she thought was a music program, then at 7:30 silence, which she took to mean the neighbor had left for work. She did not know the neighbor well. They exchanged greetings, occasionally helped each other with packages, and once, during the winter when the pipes in both houses had been problematic, had a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and covered plumbers, the age of the houses, the difficulty of getting things fixed, and the relative merits of different types of radiator, which was the most they had ever talked. But she knew the neighbor's morning by sound, as she imagined the neighbor knew hers. The particular way she made coffee, the grinder, then the stove, then the sound of the pot, could probably be heard through those thin walls with equal clarity. She thought about this sometimes, the strange intimacy of proximity, the way living next to someone meant knowing them through the sounds of their days without knowing them in the normal sense. The radio at 7, the specific way they closed the front door, firmly but not hard, the solid thud of someone who left for work with intention. For years this had been the unofficial alarm of her mornings. The neighbor's radio, 7 o'clock. She would not have said she was fond of it, but she had noticed, the one week the neighbor was evidently away, how different the mornings felt without it. Story 25. The Saturday Morning. Saturday morning was different from every other morning, and she had never quite been able to say why. The hours were the same hours. The light came in the same windows. She made the same tea in the same kitchen. But Saturday morning had a different quality, a different density, that she had been aware of since childhood and that had persisted through every change in her adult life, through the years of working Saturdays and the years of not, through living alone and living with others, through decades of different circumstances. Part of it was the absence of obligation at its center. Weekdays had tasks assigned to them from the beginning. Sunday had a slightly weighted feeling, the shadow of Monday. Saturday morning was open in a way that was unique in the week. She used it differently at different times in her life. She had had Saturday mornings that were entirely lazy, and Saturday mornings that were entirely busy, and Saturday mornings that mixed these things in proportions that shifted week by week. But even in the busiest ones, the feeling was there. The particular quality of the first hours of the day that was not any other day. She made her tea. She sat at the kitchen table. Outside the window, the street was quieter than on weekdays, but not as quiet as Sunday. The Saturday morning version of the street, slightly leisured, the school-run energy absent, people walking with the pace of people not in a hurry. She did not need to be anywhere for an hour. This was ordinary, and also, when she paid attention to it, remarkable. Story 26. The Routine That Wasn't. She had tried many times to establish a morning routine, and had failed each time in a way that told her something she kept not quite hearing. She was not a routine person, in this particular sense. She did not fail for lack of effort. She had designed the routines carefully, with reference to articles and books about habits and the productive management of morning time. She had the right intention. She failed anyway, in the same way each time. She kept the routine for 4 or 5 days, at which point something, a later night, an early commitment, a morning when she simply woke up in a different state, broke the sequence, and once broken she could not restart it. She had eventually understood, in her mid-40s, that what she had been trying to create was a fixed structure that did not suit the variable nature of her actual mornings, and that what she actually needed was a set of things she did most mornings in a flexible order, which was not a routine but which worked. She made tea, she sat for a while, she went outside, she wrote something. These things happened on most mornings, in various orders, in various combinations. On mornings when one of them didn't happen, the others still did. The overall shape was consistent even when the order was not. This was less elegant than a routine, and she could not post it as a productivity tip, and it did not have the satisfying geometry of a fixed system. But it worked for her, which was the only criterion that ultimately mattered, and she had stopped apologizing for the flexibility, to herself and to others, which was its own kind of progress. Story 27. The Good Day. Some days were simply good days, and she had learned not to look for the reason. This one had started ordinarily enough. She had slept well, which was not nothing, but it was not everything. She had slept well on days that were not good, and badly on days that were. She had made her coffee. She had walked to work in the autumn air, and the light had been doing something pleasing with the trees along the park road, and she had noticed it, which was maybe the first thing. She had done her work well. Not all of it was interesting, but all of it had gone smoothly, which was its own kind of satisfaction. She had a conversation with a colleague that was easy and funny and contained something useful for both of them. She ate her lunch outside because it was mild enough, which was not always possible in October. In the afternoon, she had remembered something she had been meaning to do for 3 weeks, a small task, the sort of thing that hangs in the peripheral vision of consciousness until it is done. And she did it in 10 minutes, and it was done, and the peripheral vision cleared. She walked home. The light was different from the morning, lower, more orange, the autumn afternoon light that she preferred to the summer equivalents. She stopped at the good bakery and bought a pastry she did not need, and ate it on the walk home, and it was very good. The evening was quiet. She cooked something she liked, she read before bed, and the book was good. None of this was large, none of it was remarkable. The day had no event that, reported to someone else, would make them understand why it was good. It was good in the texture of it, in the accumulation of small things going right, one after another, in no particular order, across the ordinary hours. Story 28. The Wrong Turn. She took the wrong turn and found herself in a part of the city she had not been before, and she was glad of it. She had been walking in a direction she knew and had been distracted. Her phone, a thought, the sound of something she turned to look at, and had continued past the junction she should have turned at, and was, by the time she noticed, in a street that was unfamiliar. She was not lost. She had a rough sense of her location and the time, and was not urgently needed anywhere. She kept walking. The unfamiliar street was interesting in the way that unfamiliar streets are interesting when you have the time for them. Not picturesque, particularly. It was a residential street, Victorian terraces, the kind she passed through often, but this one had small details that distinguished it. The tree planted outside one of the houses that was notably larger than its neighbors, clearly an old tree, its roots slightly lifting the pavement around it. A doorstep with an arrangement of pots that was more elaborate and more successful than most, which she stopped to look at. A cat on a wall that regarded her approach and departure with equal equanimity. She came out the other end of the street onto a road she recognized and oriented herself and walked home by the correct route. The detour had cost her 10 minutes. She had seen a tree and some pots and a cat. These were not dramatic findings, but she had been in a place she had not been before, and it had been there, doing its ordinary thing, and she had seen it. Story 29. The End of the Day. She had a practice she had fallen into without planning. At the end of the working day, before she closed the laptop, she wrote 3 sentences about what had happened. Not a review or a report. Just 3 sentences, in plain language, about what the day had contained. She had started doing this during a difficult period, when she needed the act of articulation to help her process the days, and had kept doing it after the difficult period ended, because by then it had become part of how the day completed itself. 3 sentences was the right number. 1 was too short to constitute a thought. 5 was too many and became a burden. 3 was manageable and sufficient, enough to say something real, not so much as to require more effort than she had at the end of a day. Some entries were straightforward: a meeting that had gone well, a thing finished, a problem that had been resolved. Some were less straightforward: a difficult conversation, something she had not done that she had meant to, a feeling she could not entirely account for. Some were so ordinary as to seem barely worth writing: a day of quiet work, nothing dramatic, nothing resolved, and these she wrote anyway, because the ordinary days deserved the same record as the dramatic ones. She did not read the entries back often. When she did, she found them less depressing than she had expected, and more interesting than she had expected. The texture of ordinary days, accumulated, showed her things about herself she could not have seen in any single entry. She was more consistent than she thought. She was also more variable than she thought. Both things. Story 30. The Old Coat. She had the coat for 19 years. She had bought it in her late 20s from a shop that no longer existed, and it had been expensive enough that she had hesitated before buying it, and then bought it on the reasoning that something made well and bought once was better than something cheap bought many times. This reasoning had turned out to be correct. The coat was wool, charcoal gray, with a simple cut that had not dated in 19 years, and which she suspected would not date in 19 more. She had had it cleaned every couple of years. She had had one button replaced when the original had come loose, with a button she had found that was close but not identical, which she had accepted as the price of long ownership. She wore it from October to April. It was her winter coat, simply. Her winter coat for 19 years. It had been to funerals and weddings and ordinary Tuesdays and bad days and good days. It had been worn to hospitals and to airports and to a great many meals and walks. She sometimes thought about the coat as an accumulation of occasions, which was an unusual way to think about a coat. Most of these occasions it could not recall, being a coat. But she recalled them when she put it on, and it was the coat that had been at those occasions, and was still this coat, still good, still warm. She was not sentimental, mostly, but she was attached to this coat in the specific way of an attachment to a thing that had been reliably itself for 19 years. When it finally gave out, which would happen eventually, she would be sad about it, which was an appropriate response to losing a faithful object and which she intended to allow herself. Story 31. The Small Victory. The small victory was this. She had finally sent the email. The email had been not sent for 3 weeks. It was not a difficult email. It was merely the kind of email that required her to ask something of someone in a way that felt slightly presumptuous, though she could not fully account for why it felt that way, and this slight feeling had been enough to keep her from sending it. She was aware that this was disproportionate. She was aware that the email would be sent, would be received, would result in either a yes or a no, and that both outcomes were manageable. She was aware that the 3 weeks of not sending had caused more difficulty than the sending would cause. All of this awareness had not, until today, been sufficient to produce the email. She sent it. It took 4 minutes to write, which was 3 minutes more than it needed to take, and several weeks later than it should have been. She felt, having sent it, the specific relief of something done that had been not done for longer than it should have been. Not pride, which would have been an excessive response to sending an email. Relief. The clearing of a small obstruction from a part of her mind that had been slightly snagged on it for 3 weeks. This was, she knew, a minor event. It was the kind of thing she would not report to anyone because it was too small to report and also too intimate. The size of the obstruction revealed something about her that she did not particularly want explained. But she had sent it. The reply came 2 days later. Yes, of course, whenever suits you. The 3 weeks of difficulty resolved in 2 days of nothing. Story 32. The last story of the day. She read to her children every night until they were old enough to want to read themselves. And then she read alongside them, quietly, in the same room, until even that was no longer wanted. And then she read alone, which was what she had done before children, and had, in some way, been waiting to return to. The bedtime reading had been the best part of many difficult years. Not because the stories were always good. Some of them were very bad, by the 3rd or 4th read-through, in the way of books chosen by small children for reasons that were not literary quality. But because of what the reading was, a stop, a still point, a moment at the end of the day when nothing was required except to sit together and follow a story. The particular quality of children's attention when being read to was something she had not expected and had come to love. The complete quality of it. The unself-consciousness, the way they simply entered the story and were there, unguarded. She had read hundreds of books over those years. Some of them she could still recite, the ones her daughter had loved most, the ones her son had requested over and over, for reasons she had eventually understood were not about the stories but about the ritual, about the same words at the same time each night. The familiarity of them, the security of the same. Now she read alone, as she had before. The house was quiet at the end of the day. The children were in their own lives. She was in her chair with her book, and the light was good, and the end of the day was something she moved toward, rather than retreating from. Story 33. The Kitchen Table. She had made most of the important decisions of her adult life at the kitchen table. This was not a plan. It was simply what the kitchen table was. It was where she sat in the mornings, and the mornings were when she thought most clearly, and clear thinking was what decisions required. The table was also where she spread out whatever she was working through. Papers, open books, the laptop at an angle that let her look up without losing her place. The table itself was not remarkable. It was round and wooden and had a surface that bore the marks of many years of use. The ring from a coffee cup that she had never managed to fully remove, A scratch from a corner of something she could no longer identify, a slight unevenness along one edge where the finish had worn away. She had not replaced the table when the surface began to show these things. She had simply continued to use it. She had sat at this table and decided to quit a job that was making her unhappy. She had sat at it and accepted a different job that she was not certain about and that had turned out well. She had sat at it, alone, on a Thursday evening 7 years ago, and worked out what she needed to do about something that needed working out, and had done it. The table had no memory of these occasions. It was a table. But she had memory of them, and they had happened here, at this surface, in this light, with the particular view through the kitchen window that was the view from the place where she thought. She cleaned the table on Sunday mornings. She put things away and wiped the surface, and the table was briefly clear, ready for the week. On Monday morning, she put her coffee down and opened what needed opening and began again. Story 34. The Habit. The habit had started as an experiment and had become, without her noticing the transition, simply part of how she lived. She had read something about the benefits of spending 10 minutes outside each morning, regardless of weather, before looking at a screen. She had tried it for a week out of curiosity and had found it either beneficial or merely pleasant, and had continued. The 10 minutes had expanded to 20, then 30. She now spent half an hour outside every morning before her day began. She walked, mostly, though sometimes she simply stood in the garden with her tea and looked at whatever was there to look at, which was enough. The not looking at a screen first was the part she had found most interesting. She had not considered, before the experiment, how immediately she reached for the phone in the morning, how quickly the morning began to be processed through the filter of what was happening elsewhere rather than what was happening here. The 30 minutes of outside before the phone changed the proportions. She arrived at the screen already in the day, rather than arriving at the day through the screen. She had told friends about this practice, tentatively, because it sounded like the sort of thing that could be annoying to hear about. The responses had been roughly split between people who found it interesting and people who found it impractical. Both responses were reasonable. It was not a practice for everyone. It was a practice for her, in her specific life with its specific shape. She went outside. She spent 30 minutes. She came back in. And that brings us to the end of tonight's stories. You have listened to 12 everyday stories in English about mornings and commutes, cooking and libraries, neighbors and new beginnings. These are the kinds of stories that make up a life. Ordinary, quiet, full of small moments that matter. We hope the English felt natural and easy as you listened. We hope some of the words and phrases have found their way gently into your mind, settling there while you rest. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, please subscribe to Cozy English. A new set of stories is waiting for you every week. Share this video with a friend who is also learning English. The gift of language is one of the best things you can pass on. Sleep well, learn gently, and we will see you next time. Good night.